Welcome, welcome everyone. Awesome. I'm so glad you made it, Abby. Down at Dixie. All right. All right. Kyle, you down for 6A this year with me? Party time. Nick. Yay. Nick, I'm in 6A with you this year.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if you can help me out with this.
Okay.
So in our region, last year there were 5 teams, and to the best of my understanding, 2 of those teams, one of those teams is for sure not going to continue their program, and the other team may or may not have a program based on if they have found a replacement at Jordan. So my question is, in that scenario, what becomes the purpose of region if the top 3 teams get through?
Though we have to still hold it to qualify for state. Yeah.
So
However,
everybody shows up and everybody qualifies.
That's pretty much what's happened in other regions where this is the case. Yeah, where we only have like 2 schools, and yeah, it is a thing, and you can just hold 3 rounds. It's great practice, and Matthew's here, yay! Yeah, it's the life of our things. You could ask maybe to combine with another region. Not that you would, they would still qualify with their own regions, and they would still all qualify, but you could maybe open up to have more competition between people.
Sure.
And things like this.
Like maybe you could join up with like another region and swap judges so everyone's clean.
Right, exactly. And also, your teams, you only have one policy team, at least let them compete with someone else and get some practice in a region and feel like they've actually done
something besides our own school.
Right. So regions can still do that as long as, that's okay with their regions and your guys' regions agree to do that. That's fine.
Okay. And is this going to be logistics, or is this going to an accessibility, or is this going to be the resources one first?
I think this is logistics response. Is that the first one is logistics? I think
it says on the schedule logistics and accessibility, but verbally
I said something wrong. It's logistics and accessibility. And is that you, Gavin, that's doing this?
Yes.
Awesome. You should have sharing capability if you need, and everything. Welcome, everyone. I think I don't know if everyone's here yet or not. If you guys want to do a thumbs up that you're here, let Gavin know you're ready to start. Matthew is so excited. I'm so happy, Matthew. I love your smile. I was worried you weren't going to come back this year. I saw your stress levels last year. So
I dragged him kicking and screaming. I told him he absolutely is not allowed to quit. My daughter would murder him and me.
Well, I get to play with you, Matthew, so I'm so excited because I'm 6'2", too, so yay. Yeah, so cool deal. Awesome, everyone. Well, I am going to turn you over to Gavin. Again, I'm feeling a little old because I love Gavin to death, and I remember when he was out at Grantsville and we were at tournaments and I was judging and he was helping run the tournaments, and we were like running everything around people, I think. I don't know. Yeah. Gavin and I became friends a while ago, so
yeah.
when he graduated and started coaching and now he's on my team, I'm feeling very sentimental and excited to have him with us because I feel he's a very valuable person to our resources here. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Tanya. I adore you. I would definitely. Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm Gavin Serr. I'm the head coach at Park City High School. As Tanya says, I'm young. This is like my 3rd year of coaching, so I'm sure that many of you will have lots of insight and wisdom, so I hope that you will share that as well. So the purpose of this discussion is to talk about logistics and accessibility for travel and summer camps. So this is going to focus less on traveling locally and less on how to register for local tournaments, and more on how to make it out of state how to build the kind of program that makes it to the TOC and nationals and how to make it that far. And more importantly, how to make that accessible to all students, regardless of income or resources. So again, if you have questions or thoughts, chime in. I would hope that it's more of a discussion than anything else. But I just have a few of my observations and tips and tricks and hints and things that I've learned coaching the last few years and the things that have worked really well for Park City. So the first thing I would say is the golden rule is always to ask another coach. The truth of the matter is that there is always someone with an answer, someone who has done it, been there, has experience with it. And this is something that is true of all coaches, regardless of how long they've been coaching. So if you're new, don't feel like it's burdensome, because it absolutely isn't. It's like when coaches have asked me questions, it's really easy to answer. It's really not a big deal. I don't feel weird answering questions, so know that it's not an issue. So don't feel anxious about asking. And I ask questions all the time. So know that that's the norm. That's perfectly normal. And it's also very important. If you're not willing to ask questions, it'll be a problem for you. So with that being said, I think the most integral part of travel and summer camps and making debate accessible is having or doing enough fundraising that you can afford to travel and afford to subsidize travel for students that wouldn't otherwise be able to attend. So a few of my basic principles for effective fundraising is, first and foremost, know that everything you do should advance your public relations. Every waking moment is a photo op. Every conversation should involve selling your team's success. Ensure that your students and parents think of your team as successful, and communicate constantly with your parents. So there are a few ways that a few things that I've done rather at Park City that have been really effective and that have helped us a lot to sort of help people think that we're successful, even more successful than we may be, in fact. One is that I invite parents to every practice. We always have parents around. They see what's happening. They generally like what they see, and that makes a big difference. I invite other teachers to judge practice rounds, so other teachers see what's happening. And, I'm sure that most of y'all have had experience with this. When outsiders see what happens in debate, they are always astounded, because I really think that speech and debate just as an activity really sells itself. If you just give people an opportunity to come in, see what you are doing in your program, in all likelihood, they will be very impressed. So I think that makes a huge difference, because if administrators and teachers and the community at large thinks that what you're doing is important and thinks that what you are doing as a coach is effective, they're going to be a lot more likely to show up to your fundraisers. They'll be a lot more likely to help you advertise. They'll be a lot more likely to donate. So think of everything you do in those terms as an opportunity to show off what you are doing and get more people involved. It makes a huge difference. Do any other coaches have insight, thoughts on things that you do for PR that might be valuable or that you'd like to share? It's okay if no one does. But
I know Susan Raymond has like everything on our Facebook site and a website. She does a great job publishing about West.
Yeah. Social media is another great opportunity to do that. Yeah, social media or a website, things like that make a huge difference. The next thing that I would say is to go for quality over quantity. One of the things that I learned kind of the hard way, actually, is that doing a lot of smaller fundraisers throughout the year and just sort of making it a constant thing takes a lot of time and effort. My personal, I guess maybe this is personal preference, but I have found that a larger annual fundraiser is generally my preference. Just get it all over with in September or October and then be done for the year. I think it's easier that way, but I guess that's personal preference. And then the last thing that I would say is to think big and get creative. I think that a lot of the traditional fundraising mechanisms that people use are very difficult and don't raise that much money. So things like selling cookie dough or selling chocolate or like things like that, that a lot of teams do, I think are very, very time consuming and very, very difficult. And I think that often they don't really raise that much money. or at the very least, that's been my experience. Maybe I do it wrong, but historically, I just haven't found a lot of success fundraising when I was debating myself, and now as a coach, using things like World's Finest Chocolate is one that my team did when I was competing, and we just didn't raise that much money, and it was a lot of work. So I have a few ideas. These are things that I've done. The top one is just donations from parents and alumni. When I was competing at Grantsville and now as a coach at Park City, soliciting donations from parents and alumni is the easiest way to fundraise. And it's something that has happened at both. It actually happened more at Grantsville than at Park City, which is somewhat counterintuitive. But just getting donations from the people who are involved or have been involved on your team is one of the easiest ways to do it. At Park City, we also participate in a fundraiser called Live PC, Give PC, wherein all of our students send out emails and texts and just general correspondence to everyone they know, basically, sending them a link to a website to donate to the Park City High School debate team. We don't have to create the website. It's all run through the Park City Education Foundation, but this is something that you could probably do on your own, is create a link, create a website where people can donate, and then just do a fundraiser like that, where you just have all of your students send out a link. And then the other advantage of that is that when people donate like that online, whether it's $5, whether it's $10 or $20, when every student on your team is sending out this message, this link to 10 or 20 people, you will find that you can raise quite a lot of money. And the other advantage is that you then also have a list of donors, of all of the people who have donated, assuming that you're collecting that information as you should. And then you can keep going back and asking for more every year. And this is something that will compound over time. It can help you have a record of donors and continue to fundraise from them year after year. So I think that that's a really effective way, super easy, just creating a website and asking people to donate often does it all. So that's something that we've done. The other fundraiser that we do every year is a silent auction. We will, I was gonna say rent out, but we don't rent it out because they give it to us for free. But there's a local business, it's called Oh Shucks, it's the Family Bar. I don't know if any of you have ever been. There's one in Salt Lake, there's one in Park City. But every year we reserve the Oh Shucks, and everyone, eats, does their thing. We organize talent from everyone on the team. So some people will do, we'll perform pieces. We had some other people who would sing and dance. We had some stand-up comedians last year. It's very, very entertaining, and the parents love it. And then on top of that, we'll do a silent auction in the back of the restaurant, where every student on the team was required to donate something to the silent auction. And you'd be surprised the scope of the things that students can find when given the opportunity. We had some families that would donate, a weekend at their cabin. We had some that were just getting, $10 or $15 subway cards or, gift cards or whatever. Someone donated a violin to be sold at the silent auction. We went up and down Main Street in Park City and got a bunch of businesses to donate things to us for our silent auction. And we ended up raising about $15,000 just from the silent auction. And we got a portion of the proceeds from all of the food sales that night at the restaurant. And then we had a couple of parents that just came and donated, just gave us money. They didn't even buy anything. They just donated. So that's something that works very, very well. We did a similar thing when I was competing at Grantsville, and it worked very, very well. So again, think outside the box. My suggestion is, when it comes to fundraising, collaboration with a local business is usually a smart move, whether it's, Oh Shucks, or whether it's just doing the Domino's pizza night, or I think Chipotle will do a portion of the proceeds for schools. Another thing that we did while I was at Grantsville was we did a bowling night, which was also very effective. We raised a lot of money that way as well. We rented out the bowling alley in Tooele, and we invited all of the students And for $25 a night, they could get, for the whole night, they would get unlimited bowling, unlimited laser tag. They would get like some amount of arcade games. And again, it's relatively simple, and it was relatively easy to do. Most of what we had to do was just marketing and getting kids there. And we ended up raising a bunch of money because everyone came to bowling night. So again, collaboration with local businesses makes things a lot easier, and it takes a lot of the logistical work out of your hands. Car washes are also an easy thing to do. We've had success doing that at Park City. And then of course, there's always just selling things, chocolate cookie dough candles. My pro tip, if you're going to sell things, is to just sell in your classroom. That's not really something I've done at Park City, but at Grantsville, we didn't raise a ton of money, but we raised a little bit. My debate teacher would just sell all year long in his classroom. He'd have his own little fundraising stand at the back of the room, and at the beginning of class, he'd dole out all of the sugary treats to fundraise for the team. And that was relatively easy. And like I said, I mean, it didn't raise a lot, but it was relatively easy, so it's worth doing. And then the final thing that I would suggest doing for fundraising is to write grants. Most school districts, not all, but most school districts have an education foundation. Writing a grant to your local education foundation is really, really easy. It'll take you like an hour, and you never know how much you get. It might be a little bit, it might be a lot. At Park City, we have years where we don't get anything at all, and we have other years where we get a lot of money, just depending on who donated that year, how much money they have, and who's on the board, who's doling out the grants. So it's always worth doing because it's relatively easy. It's a quick thing to do, but the reward can be pretty substantial, just depending on the circumstances. So those are the things that work for me. But again, it's all entirely circumstantial, and it's going to work differently, and different strategies and fundraising ideas will be more effective depending on where you teach and what kind of a community you coach in. So any other thoughts or ideas, other things that have worked for the rest of y'all? I feel like I've talked a lot.
Hi, Kyle Daniels here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So for just our situation where I am at Cypress High School out in Magna, a lot of equity issues are there, but what I found that have worked well, I guess it hasn't been effective for me to parents, for instance. Most of my parents will have 2 or 3 jobs that are minimum wage jobs, and so we just don't have that ability to get them involved as much as we want, including with donations. But what I have found effective is I've reached out to a number of organizations throughout the Valley and volunteer my students to serve at their, they have private or silent auctions, or anything from what's that conference hall downtown? I just slipped my mind. The Salt Palace. And they'll go volunteer, help people register and things like that for out-of-town organizations that will come in. And then they'll talk to people one-on-one and tell them what they are, who they are, what they represent, and then they get donations that way. We've also been able to work with both political parties in Utah, Republicans and Democrats, that let our students come and host or help volunteer at their conventions. And then from there, they get to talk one-on-one with individuals within the community, and then they get donations, private donations that way. I hope that makes sense, but basically we reach out to people within the county, Salt Lake County, and find our way into doors. And then from there, and we're very upfront, great communication with all the people that we've been involved with, letting them know that, yeah, we'll volunteer. We will run and help you guys run your organization, whatever you guys are doing for this weekend event, but ensure that we can still talk to individuals one-on-one and tell them where we're from or what we're doing, and then get private donations that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I think that's great.
So even if you're in a situation where you can't necessarily find your parents' involvement or your own local community, I have found that the community at large definitely wants to jump in and help where they can. And a lot of people that I've met through this way had no idea about the debate community. And that's actually gone into finding judges and finding people to get involved on another level as well. So hopefully somebody in this call finds that advantageous. And you can reach out and talk to me individually if you desire.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Any other thoughts, Nick?
Yeah, so I'm at Bingham, and I worked a little bit with Matthew Walker a few years ago as an assistant before this job, and he introduced me to SnapRaise. And I know not every district does SnapRaise, but it was really effective for them at Copper Hills and really effective for us. It functions very similarly to what you were describing as far as like your Park City Foundation, but they are a third party. They do take a percentage, so some school districts don't allow it. But again, they set up the website, they come shoot a commercial, they give you a link. They also give you a link to post on Instagram, Snapchat, all that kind of stuff. And it was really effective. We raised like $7,000 last year via SnapRaise alone. And then one of the things that we had planned on doing this year, but will probably not happen due to social distancing guidelines, is we had planned on doing like a gift wrapping thing in the month of December where you could come to the debate room after class and then we would wrap your presents for you and then you could donate to the team that way. That was what we had originally been planning for December. So just some ideas.
I'll chime in about SnapRaise as well. I know a lot of people don't like it because it takes a percentage, but I know there's other programs out there that are similar that take less of a percentage and do the same thing. But also what I've noticed is because it's through a company and grandparents and other family members who do have necessarily money when the parents don't and the like close family doesn't or friends might, then it ends up being able to reach those and then they trust the actual website as opposed to just something set up. But yeah, all of the ideas work well.
Yeah, I'll just say, I put in this thing in the chat. There's another one called ed.co. They are the same way. They're an educational GoFundMe type thing. They can actually direct deposit to your school or send a check, and they're really good to work with. They take a very small percentage. And again, it's just sharing out on social media to your community. I've sent out letters to businesses and they could donate through their business that way and sponsor our team through it. It makes an online platform, especially if your school doesn't allow you to handle money or accept checks and things like this. It was a great way that it was simple, easy, kids could chat out and stuff. So that's another format that's been accepted at most of the places I've been to be able to do, but check with your districts. Always check with your districts.
Perfect. These are all great ideas. Yeah. Any other thoughts or input? Okay, terrific. Yeah, I think that all of those are fantastic ideas. And again, it's all circumstantial. So find what works for you, because it does depend a lot on location and community. My next section is about travel. And I guess the first question is to ask, why travel? Why go out of state? And I think that that's a valid question. And the first that I would give is just that it's more rigorous competition. Traveling on the national circuit is more educational, it's more engaging, and it's also more fun. I personally, as a debater in high school, traveling nationally is one of the biggest reasons that I stayed in debate, because it was just, I mean, it was incredible. The level of debate that exists in Utah, but even more so in other places, is really pretty incredible and really pretty inspiring as well. So being able to compete at that level is really, really an incredible opportunity. It was for me, and it is for my students and all the other students that have that opportunity. So I think it's important that it's something that any student who wants to has the ability to. Additionally, I think it helps students build strong college applications. It makes a big difference, or at least that's been my observation. Additionally, it can help drive recruitment and engagement with students and the community. I use a lot of our performance at out-of-state travel in our fundraising drives. It really impresses people. So it's something that definitely makes a difference and can help that way as well. It's sort of a positive feedback loop, as it were. Additionally, it gives students an opportunity to travel and encounter ideologically and geographically diverse people and ideas. I grew up in Grantsville. I debated at Grantsville. The first time I ever got on an airplane was to go to nationals as a freshman. And pretty much all of my travel, even now as a coach, is through debate. I would not get to experience the different places and people that I have had it not been for my ability to travel out of state in debate, which I think has opened my eyes in a lot of ways, and has certainly done that for a lot of my students that also wouldn't otherwise have opportunities to travel and see the world. So I think that it's something that's pretty valuable personally. Hence why this was what I volunteered to lead a discussion on. So my tips and tricks for getting there, and this is by no means a comprehensive list, but the first thing I would say is select competitive tournaments and don't be afraid to lose. Often I see a lot of coaches who want to travel to the easier tournaments, assuming that their students will perform better, or that they'll be more likely to have a winning record or something of the sort. And my view is that I think that really defeats the point of traveling. I would really contest the entire concept of hunting for bids to the TOC or anything of the sort. You should, I would strongly suggest challenging your students, challenging yourself, going to the most rigorous tournaments that you can within your budget, of course, and in ways that are that make financial sense. Because that's what's going to ultimately make your students the best debaters, and that's what's going to be the most educational for them. The next thing I would say is don't wait. Your students will never be ready. And that there are a lot of reasons for that. First, just that competition in Utah does not always emulate what it's like on the national circuit. So waiting until, you know, they're performing at a high level locally isn't necessarily indicative of how they'll perform nationally. I've had students who will win every local they go to, but then as soon as they travel out of state, it's just 06 all day. And I've had students where it's the other way around, where they just don't seem to do very well in front of judges in Utah and against Utah opponents. But then they go out of state and suddenly the stars align, and then they seem to do very well in other areas. So I wouldn't base too much of your decision as to whether or not you can take your team out of state on how well they're doing locally. And I also would just add that I personally am of the opinion that if students are putting in the hard work, going out of state, even if they get absolutely demolished, is something which will be a good learning opportunity for them, so long as they have a growth mindset about it. So as if students have proven themselves and work through hard work rather than necessarily their competitive record, I think that it's always valuable to take them out of state. And it's something that I wouldn't wait to try and do or offer students the opportunity to do. The next thing I would say is have a roster at least 2 months in advance, preferably more. This is one of the harder things to do, trying to nail down or trying to get a commitment from students is often like you know, trying to nail Jello on the wall, as I'm sure that y'all know, just from teaching and from coaching debate. It can be difficult to get students and families to commit to a tournament next week, let alone several months from now. But that's really the critical component, because that's really the key to being able to pay early so that you can get off the wait list. It's the key to getting good prices from buying your flights or booking your hotels well enough in advance. It's really the key to everything. So having your roster ready is really important. Paying early is really important. That will make a big difference. The next thing I would say is the bigger your travel squad, the better. If you can fit more students into your hotel room, if you can fit more students, I mean, if you can get a group discount on your flights, the more you have, the cheaper it will be. Just in general, the more students you can get there, the cheaper you can make it for everyone. I would also set reminders when registration opens for the tournaments that you're trying to attend, particularly in the age of online debate. Tournaments fill up fast. Even when it's in person, most bid tournaments will fill up a month in advance. So your ability to get off the wait list and take as many teams as possible really relies on you being one of the first to sign up and one of the first to pay. So a lot of my tips for getting there relies on being organized and being on the ball and getting things done as early as possible. I would also suggest submitting as many travel requests as you might need. And again, this depends on what your school board is like and what the process is like and how open they are to travel. At Grantsville and at Park City, our strategy at both places was to submit a dozen travel requests. And we probably would only travel 4 or 5 or 6 times, maybe. That's probably more. It's like at Park City. At Grantsville, we would travel once a year or twice a year. But we would submit a ton of travel requests because the worst problem is having to wait to book things because you have to wait for the school board to approve it next month. So I would suggest, if you haven't done it already and you want to travel this year, submit your travel requests today, and then submit all of your travel requests for next year as well today. That way it is all completely done and you don't have to worry about that. And again, that depends on your school board. Some school boards do not like that strategy, do not approve of it, and will just deny your requests. So I would check in with either someone on the school board or someone else who has experience with the school board to find out what the norms are and what they're okay with. Nick?
Just a quick note on this year, in discussions with other programs that are, competitive nationally and talking to people from camp and stuff, to the best of my knowledge, every single TOC bid tournament will be online only for the entirety of the year. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's something else to keep in mind. Opportunities for travel are going to be incredibly limited. And, I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, I should have added that disclaimer. I mean, I guess my thinking in putting together this presentation is probably that online debate is not going to be the norm moving forward, post coronavirus. So
yeah,
I
just imagine, at least for
a lot of this doesn't
year.
apply for this year. But in terms of travel and sort of my tips for travel, but this year in particular is a great year to try and compete nationally and compete on that level because it's more accessible than it's ever been and probably more accessible now than it ever will be. My suspicion is that there will probably be at least a few tournaments based on people I talk to teaching at camp, is that there will probably be at least a few tournaments that will permanently stay online. But this is a good year to try and compete at that level. Otherwise, most of this presentation is geared towards a post-coronavirus world. But yeah, any other thoughts or input on anything that I've listed here or just anything else generally about travel? Cool. My next slide is about booking accommodations.
Wait, question.
Sure.
Give me a minute. Could those of you who travel maybe recommend, Nick just said, about the TOCs all being online. Mm-hmm. Well, for somebody who doesn't roll in that world, could you list us of hey, maybe you should try these top 5 or something to that effect?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a general rule, the tournaments that I would suggest for Utah teams are ASU and UNLV. They're the closest, they're the cheapest to get to, and they're pretty high quality tournaments. The other thing I would say is that it depends a lot on the event. So my experience is mostly in public forum. So the PF tournaments that I would suggest signing up for without accommodations being a factor this year would probably be ASU. I would highly suggest Apple Valley. Emory is another one of my favorites. Glenbrooks is a good tournament. Those would probably be the ones that I would suggest going to or looking up. Tournaments to avoid, because there are some very bad ones. I would avoid Berkeley. I would avoid Harvard. I would avoid pretty much anything in Florida or Texas. Really, most of those tournaments are just not as well run. There are geographic differences that make it more difficult for Utah teams to debate there, at least in public forum. In LD, I would strongly suggest Meadows is a great option. It's in Vegas, so it's relatively close. Again, UNLV is relatively good option. I think Green Hill is a great tournament in LD. I think St. Mark's, I think, has LD. They have policy. It's a great policy tournament. But those would be the ones that I would suggest for LD and PF. Nick can probably talk more about policy. I don't know as much about policy as Nick, but what tournaments would you suggest?
Yeah, my background is primarily in policy. It really just depends, like as far as like in a normal travel, scenario, I would look to things that have already been mentioned, for example, Arizona, UNLV, Meadows. Berkeley is kind of a nightmare, and that's a lot of the reason why we put Copper Classic up against Berkeley specifically last year. And we had several national teams come because we wanted to offer West Coast teams an alternative to Berkeley. There was just a lot of other extenuating factors last year. Like it happened to fall on President's Day weekend and Valentine's Day. So like, and then there were two other like local tournaments. I would look to, there is definitely a difference in like, Gavin spoke to like East Coast versus West Coast, like philosophies. For example, my daughter attended the Harvard tournament last year in policy, and it was very different. It was a positive experience for her because I think it better prepared her to debate in college, but it was definitely a different experience compared to like a West Coast tournament. Early season, one of the huge ones is Long Beach. It's called the Jack Howe. That's an incredible tournament. They offer a lot of different divisions and a lot of different events. And, it being a relatively close college, they do a lot of recruiting. So it's a good opportunity to network with, if your kids are looking to, go to school for 4 years on the beach. It's a good opportunity for networking. Other West Coast stuff, I actually grew up in the Midwest, so I'm a little more familiar with like the Midwest circuit. But yeah, in an online world, I think the key is what events are important to you. So like Jennifer, if you decide that, hey, these are the events I like to focus on, I could sit down with you and we could look at some tournaments that are better for those particular events. Because there are definitely some national tournaments that are like speech only, for example, that might be great if your team is more speech oriented. So, but yeah, so I think step one is figure out what you want out of a national tournament. And then step two would be reach out to like myself or Mike or Gavin or somebody who does a little bit more national circuit. We're happy to point you in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to echo what Nick said. I mean, he's completely right. Feel free to come and talk to us because it really does depend on the event and what exactly your program is looking for in a tournament. And particularly now, you have so many options. So feel free to shoot me an email. Like if I can't answer it or I can't answer it well, then I'll point you in the direction of someone who I know can. So again, it just goes back to feel free to ask, and I'm happy to go through my experiences at different tournaments and the ones that I think are the best run, that have the best competition. So yeah, any other questions on the topic of scheduling and tournaments or anything of the sort? Okay, excellent. Again, none of this is going to apply this year, but in the future, I think that one of the things that can be most daunting is booking accommodations and seeing the prices and realizing how expensive it is to travel, and it is expensive. So here are sort of my pro tips for trying to keep things as cheap as possible. The first is not to fall into a routine. You should not plan on always taking a bus to, UNLV or always flying to ASU or always doing any one thing, because prices change. And, every year things are going to be a little bit different based upon, is it a holiday? Is Sundance going on? Is it going to be, more expensive to fly out of the Salt Lake City airport? The time of year, what kind of weather is it going to be? I mean, there are just so many factors. How many students are you taking that change from year to year, that you should always be trying to book your accommodations based on what is the cheapest. And that also, I guess, the other tip that I didn't write on here, but that I guess I would share is I would wait to make any plans or accommodations until after how many students you're taking. So I would not make plans until you have your roster. That's what I do at Park City, and that makes a big difference because whether or not we drive or fly or whether we rent cars or Uber around depends a lot on the size of the squad for that particular tournament. I would also suggest coordinating with other schools, particularly if your travel team is small or you don't have experience traveling. shoot an email to, again, me or Mike or Nick or, anyone else that travels and say, hey, we want to go to UNLV. Would you like to share a bus, or can we, coordinate hotels or anything of the sort? And that can help alleviate some of the logistical burdens and also make things a little bit cheaper if we can find ways to cram extra students into the bus, or, and share hotel rooms to maximize the space and thus the cost. When it comes to hotels, I generally suggest using the tournament hotels. That should be listed on the invitation. But again, you have to book early. And that's the key is you have to have that. You have to have a plan. You have to have your roster. And you have to be booking literally months in advance, 2-3 months before the tournament, to try and get into the tournament hotel. Because again, those blocks almost always fill up. And the reason that they fill up is because they're generally the cheapest option, because tournaments negotiate lower rates at the tournament hotel. Also, make sure that you are quadrupling up your rooming assignments. If a hotel room is a king bed, it's a no. You always want to get the double queen and make sure that you've got 4 kids in there, because it just gets expensive to do anything else. I suggest putting coaches together if possible. I know that some districts have policies that preclude that as an option, but if possible, try and double up on coaches as well. And I think it's also probably worth looking into your school or district's Airbnb policy. I personally do not use Airbnb as a coach because I just think that it has a lot of issues in terms of liability. And I think it would be a huge headache as a coach to try and oversee students at an Airbnb versus a hotel. However, as I'm sure many of y'all probably know, an Airbnb can be substantially cheaper. And at Park City, we're allowed to use Airbnbs. That's something that we could do if we wanted. And it was the same thing at Grantsville. That was something that we were told specifically that we should look into and try and use because it is a cheaper option. I just don't do it because I think that it's inconvenient and inherently risky. So again, it just depends on your team, and it's entirely circumstantial. If it's something that you can do, and if cost is a huge mitigating factor for you, and for your program, then it may be worth trying, even though it would take a little bit more effort on your part. As for transportation, I have found that Uber is generally cheaper and more convenient than rental cars. But again, it's all entirely circumstantial. Not all districts allow you to take your kids in an Uber or a Lyft. Some districts will not compensate you for your Uber or your Lyft. So it all depends, because you should not have to pay out of pocket to, take your kids around in an Uber. So it depends a lot on whether or not your district or you can be compensated, rather. Rental cars can occasionally be cheaper than buses or flights. For example, at Park City, on a couple of occasions when we're just taking a few students to UNLV, for example, we have just rented a van and just driven to UNLV in a rental van. And that's been cheaper than flying, and it's been a lot cheaper than taking a bus. So that's something that is probably worth looking into for some of the closer tournaments when you travel in the future. It's also probably worth finding out about school or district vehicles. At Grantsville, we had school Suburbans that we would use to travel. But again, there are always, policies. So for example, we couldn't take those out of state. So we would only use it for our in-state overnight travel. But it saved us a lot of money because it was completely free. All we had to pay for was the gas. So that's worth looking into. And then of course, classic, just book flights early. Makes a big difference. Make sure that you're on the ball there. Nick?
I'm not sure if you're watching the chat, but there's some questions in the chat. I wonder if you could address some of that.
No, I can't see the chat since I'm sharing my screen.
Okay,
maybe
so
I'm just technologically
Mary
illiterate.
had a question first. If you want to address hers first.
I've got a few questions about when you take a team to a hotel, how do you monitor them? What rules do you have? I had an experience where I took a team overnight, and I had one boy that just he was predatorial, and it was a lot of issues. And how do you deal with that? What I should have done is had a male person go into his hotel room and check that he was there. Right. But I didn't have a male person with me, and I don't know how to do that.
Right. That's a great question. So I will start off by saying I have yet to have any issues because I've been very fortunate. So it's not something that I can really speak to in terms of how to address those issues when they arise. But what I will say in terms of the preventative actions that I take when we travel is, first, we always have a meeting and set out very clear expectations for what time they need to be in their room, what the policies are in terms of being awake on time and treating other people with respect and going to bed at a reasonable hour, just sort of going over all of those things so that the expectations are really clear.
So
and then while I'm at the tournament, sorry?
What times do you give? I knew a coach that I was an assistant for who would keep them up until 2 a.m. talking with them and practicing with them just so they wouldn't get into trouble. And they were exhausted the next day.
Yeah.
That affected their ability to compete. They suffered that. But I could see why he did that, because he would rather have them practicing where he could see them than have them goofing around. So what times do you give?
It depends on the tournament. I will say that when it comes to, we always do, what do we call it? We always do a room check at 11. So they all have to be in bed by 11. And when we go do the room check, it's not to make sure everyone's there. It's to say, lights off, everyone's in their pajamas. It's time to go to sleep now. But I would check every single room every night. And that I think that's valuable. The other thing that I do is I rely on a snitch system, wherein the policy is that if any one person in a room gets caught doing anything, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sneaking out, anything at all, everyone in the room is banned from travel. And so it creates an incentive for people to snitch on their roommates if there's a problem, because if I find out myself and not from one of the other students, then it's bad for everyone involved. And then in terms of in the mornings, I always give enough buffer time so that when someone inevitably sleeps in, we have time to track them down. And I would suggest doing that. That's not necessarily a behavioral issue, but in terms of how to prevent that, I would suggest making your policies clear, requiring that there are always at least 2 students in a room. Generally, I would suggest having 4, again, because if you have more students in the room, it decreases the likelihood of everyone coming to a consensus that it's acceptable to do something stupid. And I would suggest room checks, making it consistent. Those would be my tips. But Nick, maybe you have something to add with the way you run your team. Maybe you do something.
You've covered most of it. I mean, again, the room checks are incredibly important. Like, there's an expectation that they're in there, and there's also, people have already kind of spoken a little bit about clear guidelines. I think it's incredibly important to be really black and white with your travel policy. Gavin's kind of spoke to this a little bit. Tanya kind of mentioned in the chat that they have a contract that they make the kids sign. And also we share these expectations with the parents, which includes both positive and, negative consequences to behavior. And we make sure that the parents understand, like what happens in the world that their kids do violate the rules. Because a lot of times the parents will help you reinforce that as well.
Nicholas, do you personally do the checks? Gavin, do you personally do the checks at 11? So they know that you're going to be coming in there at 11, and so they are dressed and...
So, what we personally do is we knock on every room and I have to see every face. I don't care if you're in bed, you have to get up, I need to see your face, and we check them off. Like I did it with Matthew Walker in Arizona last year.
Matthew, and sometimes if they're in the shower, I am okay with hearing your voice, because if I hear your voice, then I know you're in the room as well. But I have to see your face or hear your voice. And that makes it so I don't have to go into their rooms. I don't have to, and then it makes it so if I don't have a female with me, it's easy.
So how do you make sure there isn't someone in the room that isn't supposed to be in there?
If everyone else is in the room where they're supposed to be, then we assume that there's nobody extra in the room.
You assume that they haven't brought somebody from some other place into their room.
Yep. And we've never, because they have other, I guess I just come from a really good school at Copper Hills, but like they want to hang out with one another more so than bringing other people around. So like they're really close knit. So they go in and yeah, they usually don't go to bed immediately. And I can sometimes see their lights on and I have to remind them to turn the lights off and go to bed. But like, usually it's just them. I've never had an issue the 3 years.
Thank you.
Gavin, I don't know if you have it on your list of things to talk to, and I posted in the chat, you said you can't see that. Would you speak a little bit for coaches who are not familiar with traveling, like the judge acquisition process for national tournaments? For example, like you can't always afford to fly out your own judges, like, can you speak to things like that?
Right. So I think that I have that somewhere. Yes, this is where it is. So in terms of judging, my suggestion is to use parents. And again, it depends a lot on your program, but at Grantsville and at Park City, we would ask parents to come along and chaperone with us, and they would always pay their own way. We have yet to have issues where a parent has been upset that we will not pay for them to go. And then we use them as the judges, and that works very, very well. I haven't had any issues with that thus far. The other strategy that I would employ is finding local Facebook groups, because pretty much every collective of coaches has some sort of Facebook group to coordinate judges. Obviously, it's best if you can find a volunteer, but those are fewer and far between. A lot of times you can hire a local judge to judge for you for $45, $50 a day, which isn't nothing. I mean, it is expensive, but generally I would suggest trying to hire your own judge externally from the tournament using things like Facebook and that sort of thing, putting up ads, rather than trying to hire a judge directly through the tournament. And the reason is that hiring a judge directly through the tournament is always outrageously expensive. So that's my pro tip. I would say finding judges for travel is one of the more difficult things to do because it gets really, really expensive. My suggestion is to use parents as much as you can. So.
I know Catherine had her hand raised. Catherine, did you say what you wanted to say or a question?
I sure did. Thanks though for looking out.
You're good. I was going to say also with the finding judges, if you check with local college communication programs, a lot of those communication teachers require them to do like outside communication type of service and stuff like this, or maybe the teacher themselves could like put out to the kids, hey, there's an opportunity to be hired for this tournament, and get communication students or public speaking students from the colleges to come out and do and stuff. So yeah, there's success there too. Through Kelly Substitute, that is awesome, Mary. The substitute teacher pool, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually have a slightly different experience than you, Gavin, because like I said, my background's a little more policy, and it's not that easy to source a parent who can judge at a national policy level, a national circuit level policy tournament. My suggestion, honestly, would be if your program can afford it, is in that situation where you don't have qualified people, so one of the easiest ways to get them is to just hire from the tournament for those really specialized events. And I've had kind of a different experience than Gavin's had. I've had a hard time getting parents who were willing to pay their own way to, spend $400 or $500 on a trip and have to work the whole week, the whole time that they're there. So I've had a slightly different experience. So when we had to, pay for the travel of the judges that we brought along. And so when we factored in paying for travel, it ended up being cheaper for us to just hire from the tournament rather than pay for additional judges to fly and to put them up in hotel rooms and stuff. So, I mean, it's just, again, different experience coming from a more policy background. It's a lot harder to just use, someone off the street to judge.
That's good. That's good input. And I guess it just goes back to what we've said all along, which is that a lot of it is circumstantial. It depends on your school, your community, what events you're competing in. But yeah, it just depends. So any other questions or thoughts about judging?
What exactly do you mean by different styles of debate across the country? Isaac asks. So there's different types of styles across the country. Question.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, obviously you've got your three primary debate events. You've got public forum, which is supposed to be more lay friendly. Anyone should be able to walk in off the street and judge public forum. It's a 2-on-2 team event. You've got Lincoln Douglas, which is supposed to be more philosophically based, but on the national circuit ends up being more like one-man policy. And then you've got policy debate, which is, you know, the fast and the furious. An AF team presents a plan, the negative team answers the plan. Very, very technical. Even many people who coach debate probably couldn't judge a circuit policy round. It's really competitive, very fast. So I hope that adequately explains it. But even beyond that, sorry, Tanya?
What's Congress like too?
Oh, Congress. And then Congress is sort of the no man's land between speech and debate, where it's a little bit of both depending on where you are. So, I mean, those are your debate events. And then, of course, you've got all of your different speech events, and you've got interpretation, you've got limited prep, you know, impromptu speaking, you've got your platform events, oratory, where you write a speech and memorize it and give it all year. So there are just all kinds of different events. And then that's just, I mean, in terms of the categories that you enter. And that's before we even start talking about the geographic differences in the style of debate that you see. So for example, public forum in Utah tends to be relatively slow and traditional and really adheres to that lay style of debate that anyone can judge. But if you were to go to California and watch a public forum round, it's going to be a lot faster. Teams are probably going to impact out to nuclear war. You know, there's a lot of teams reading more progressive, critical and theory arguments, which is a whole nother rabbit hole that we won't go down today. But the point is, there are, you know, a variety of events, and depending on where you're competing, those events will look really differently. So again, the needs of your team in terms of judging is going to look really different, and coaching. I mean, just across the board, the needs of your team will vary a lot depending on what format you're competing in. So the other two things I would say, miscellaneous thoughts on travel, is first, I would always suggest means testing your payment. So I don't, even though you know, we fundraise a lot of money, I do not give kids just across the board, you know, we'll pay your entry fees or we'll try and make flights cheaper. I charge everyone 100% of the cost unless I know that they can't pay for it. The consequence of which is that it makes it a lot easier for me to give certain students that I know come from humbler backgrounds, you know, a full ride, you know, to attend out-of-state travel, or a partial scholarship. We'll pay for half of their travel all year long. So I means test it, and it makes it a lot easier for me. But again, that relies on you having some insight into your students' finances, which, you know, can be messy and sometimes inaccurate, but I think that it's probably the best way on balance to make it as accessible as possible.
Also,
and then
Gavin, with that, just a second. Also, you need to check with your districts with the new fee laws in Utah. If your whole team can't go, just because kids can't afford it, or don't want to pay, either the whole team can go or they can't go anymore. So there's some new rules with that, and there's also caps at your school on amount of money that you can do and stuff. So you need to be careful and work with your school on what is allowed and isn't allowed, and how the fee system is working within your district. Because even though it's a state law, there's different nuances between the different districts as well.
Right. Yeah, it's different in most districts. So
I want to add something.
Yeah, Mary.
Right now I teach at Lava Heights Academy, but in the past I taught at another school. What I did was, as far as your means, what I did is I charged people the full, like you say, Gavin. Mm-hmm. But if parents came and judged, I would pay them through discounts. And so that way, students who didn't have the money, but whose parents were participating, were rewarded. And so some students paid nothing all year because their parents were there judging all the time. And that was a way to have them maintain their dignity, and you know, put forth their effort, where those students who had more means and their parents were too busy to help, they were paying the full amount. And I thought that was very fair.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So yeah,
We're
I mean,
almost
really,
out of time. We've got like 2 minutes left.
yeah, I have a whole bunch of stuff on summer camps, so I don't think we'll get to that. But if you have questions about summer debate camp, feel free to email me. The last thing I would say, my final miscellaneous thought, is to let your kids have fun when they travel. And I found also that this reduces behavioral issues. When kids are able to have fun just as a team, they feel less like they need to sneak around and have fun or have fun in nefarious ways. So when I take my kids to UNLV for their debate tournament, we always go to the Strip. We go out to eat. We ride the roller coasters. I mean, we do it all. We have fun. And I found that is a good experience for a lot of them who may not otherwise get to travel, but it's also good in terms of mitigating behavioral issues. So yeah, like I said, I've got some stuff about summer camps. If you have questions about this, feel free to shoot me an email, and I can answer any questions you have, especially with public forum or speech camp. If you have questions about policy camps, I'll probably direct you to Nick or Mike. But yes, thank you everyone for coming. It was a great discussion.
Thank you guys. The next one is the advanced policy, and in here will in the other room, and then in here will be the extemp and Congress. LD and oratory, Isaac, I would recommend, there's a couple out there, Summit Camp, as well as ISD are two really good ones for oratory and LD. Also Congress is good for those two and stuff like that. Yeah.
I would just make sure that you know what you want out of LD before you make that decision too.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of camps are going to be much more national circuit oriented as opposed to traditional orientations, which, you know, you have to be able to debate very differently to be successful here and on the national circuit. They're two very different things.
I will say that ISD teaches you both and helps you to see both sides, just because I was there and saw that. So yeah, but yeah, you definitely look at who is running it and what